One penalty. That's all it took. Not a crash, not a mistake, not even Max Verstappen behind the wheel. Just one decision, and everything collapsed. A three-place grid drop, applied in seconds, pushed him straight into the most dangerous zone on the most unforgiving track in the world. And less than half an hour later, 7 cars were destroyed, the race was stopped, and the entire paddock went silent. This isn't just bad luck. This is a chain reaction. A hidden consequence no one is talking about. Because what if that penalty didn't just change his starting position? What if it placed him directly in the path of disaster? And if that's true, then this isn't about racing anymore. It's about a system making decisions without understanding what they actually trigger. And the deeper you go into this story, the more uncomfortable it becomes. Subscribe now, because the truth behind this changes everything. It didn't feel like a major moment. Not at first. No dramatic crash, no heated argument over the radio, no visible chaos. Just a quiet announcement, buried in the flow of a normal race weekend. A 3-place grid penalty. Simple. Routine. Almost forgettable. But that's exactly why it matters. Because the most dangerous decisions in motorsport are rarely the loud ones. They're the ones that seem harmless. The ones no one questions. And this one came from an incident that most fans never even saw. Lucas Auer, Verstappen's teammate, navigating traffic during qualifying. And here's where Nürburgring changes everything. Because traffic here isn't just slower cars. It's a completely different world sharing the same strip of asphalt. Amateur drivers. Professional drivers. Machines with massive speed differences. All compressed into one unpredictable flow. One moment you're flat out. The next, you're reacting. A Porsche ahead. Unexpected braking. A split-second decision. Contact. Not violent. Not spectacular. But enough. Enough for the stewards to step in. And that's where the chain reaction quietly begins. Because the penalty wasn't calculated for Nürburgring. It was calculated by the rulebook. Standard procedure. 3 places. No exceptions. No deeper context. And that's the detail most people missed. Because at a typical Formula 1 circuit, losing 3 positions is strategy. At the Nordschleife, it's exposure. It's the difference between clean air and chaos. Between control and survival. And suddenly, Verstappen, who had nothing to do with the incident, is no longer starting near the front. He's being dropped into the midfield. Into traffic. Into unpredictability. Into the exact environment where races don't unfold, they unravel. But here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. This isn't the first time something like this has happened to him. Earlier in the season, he dominated a race and lost everything after. A technical infringement. A rule violation. A decision made after the fact. And just like now, the outcome wasn't about performance. It was about interpretation. A pattern begins to form. Small decisions. Big consequences. And Verstappen, whether by circumstance or system, keeps finding himself on the wrong side of them. But this time, the stakes were different. Because this wasn't about losing points. This wasn't about a result on paper. This was Nürburgring, where position dictates risk. And risk doesn't negotiate. Now think about what that penalty really did. It didn't just move him back 3 places. It placed the car in a completely different race. A different flow. A different set of variables. More cars around. More overtakes required. More moments where timing has to be perfect. And on a track where perfection doesn't exist, that's a problem. Even Verstappen himself has said it. There is no perfect lap here. No perfect race. Only survival, lap after lap. And yet, the system treated this like any other weekend. Like any other grid. Like any other track. But Nürburgring isn't any of those things. It's something else entirely. And that's why this next part matters more than anything we've said so far. Because the penalty didn't just change where the car started. It changed when it would face danger. And that is where everything begins to connect. The timing looked harmless. Almost irrelevant. But it wasn't. Because in endurance racing, especially at Nürburgring, timing is everything. Not just where you are on track, but when you're there. And that's the detail that changes the entire story. Verstappen wasn't scheduled to start. He was waiting for the second stint. The moment when the light begins to fade. When visibility drops. When the track temperature shifts. When mistakes start to multiply. That wasn't random. He chose that. He wanted the most difficult phase of the race. The most demanding conditions. That tells you exactly what kind of challenge he was chasing. But here's where everything starts to connect. Because the penalty didn't just push the car backward. It shifted the entire race timeline for that car. Different position means different traffic. Different traffic means different pace. Different pace means different exposure at different moments. And suddenly, the Mercedes number 3 wasn't just starting ninth. It was entering a completely different sequence of events. One that no one could fully predict. Now picture this. The race begins. Cars spread out. Groups start forming. Faster classes weaving through slower ones. The usual chaos of the Nordschleife, but amplified. Because starting deeper in the field means you reach critical zones surrounded by more variables. More unpredictability. More risk. And then comes Klosterdal. One of the fastest sections of the entire circuit. A place where commitment is absolute. No hesitation. No margin. And crucially, no escape once something goes wrong. Now here's the part that changes everything. The accident didn't happen randomly in the race. It happened early. Very early. Just 25 minutes in. Which means something important. The field was still compressed. Still dense. Still unstable. Exactly the kind of environment a ninth place start feeds into. And this is where the chain reaction becomes impossible to ignore. 7 cars involved. 7. That's not a coincidence. That's a traffic problem. That's a positioning problem. That's a timing problem. And all 3 of those were influenced by where that car started. But here's the twist. Verstappen wasn't even in the car. He was in the garage, watching, waiting for his moment. The moment he had planned for. The moment the race never reached. And that creates a strange contradiction. Because technically, he avoided the danger. But strategically, he was placed right on its edge. One decision away from being directly involved. And that's what makes this so uncomfortable. Because we're not talking about what happened. We're talking about what almost happened. And in motorsport, those are the moments that reveal the truth. Now think about the structure of the rules again. A standard penalty. Applied without context. Without adapting to the unique conditions of the track. And the result? A car placed into a high-risk window, at the exact time the race was most vulnerable. This isn't about blaming the penalty for the crash. That would be too simple. Too easy. This is about understanding how small decisions shift probability. How they increase exposure. How they move drivers closer, or further away, from critical moments. And in this case, everything moved in one direction. Toward danger. But here's what most people still don't see. The accident stopped the race. The red flag froze everything. And in doing so, it erased the chance to see how this would have fully played out. Because if the race had continued, if Verstappen had stepped into the car, if he had entered that same traffic, under fading light, on a track already proven to be unstable, then we might be telling a very different story right now. And that possibility is exactly what makes this next part impossible to ignore. There's a moment in every major incident that never makes the headlines. Not the crash. Not the red flag. Not the official statements. The moment that comes right before all of it. The moment where everything is still preventable. And this is where the story becomes impossible to ignore. Because once the race was stopped, once the cars were stationary, once the medical teams took control, something else started to surface. Details. Fragments of what really happened in Klosterdal. 7 cars, scattered across one of the fastest sections of the track. No clear escape routes. No time to react. And then, one detail that changed the tone completely. One of those cars didn't just crash. It went under the barriers. Think about that for a second. Barriers in modern motorsport are designed to absorb impact. To contain energy. To protect the driver at all costs. So when a car goes beneath them, it means the system was pushed beyond its limits. Not slightly. Completely. And suddenly, this isn't just a racing incident anymore. This is a structural failure under extreme conditions. And here's where the silence becomes louder than any explanation. Because official communication slowed down. Information became controlled. Carefully released. Minimal. Measured. And that creates a vacuum. And in that vacuum, questions grow. What exactly triggered the first contact? How did it escalate to 7 cars? Why that section of the track? Why that moment in the race? But more importantly, why was the field in that configuration to begin with? And this is where everything circles back. Not to the crash itself, but to the setup that made it possible. Because tightly packed traffic, high-speed zones, and unpredictable braking points don't just appear randomly. They build. Lap by lap. Corner by corner. Decision by decision. And when you trace it back far enough, you start seeing the same origin point. Position. Track position. The invisible factor that dictates everything else. Who you fight. When you fight. How much risk you're forced to take. And in this case, how close you are when something goes wrong. Now remember where that Mercedes number 3 was placed. Not at the front. Not in clean air. But inside the storm. Exactly where incidents don't just happen, they multiply. And this is the part that makes people inside the paddock uncomfortable. Because no one wants to say it directly. But many are thinking the same thing. If you place enough cars in the wrong place, at the wrong time, on a track like this, something will break. Not might. Will. And when it does, the consequences won't match the simplicity of the decision that led there. A 3-place penalty sounds small. It sounds controlled. But here, it wasn't. Here, it shifted probability. It increased density. It moved pieces on the board in ways that aren't immediately visible, but are absolutely real. And that's why this moment feels different. Because it exposes something deeper than a single incident. It exposes how fragile the balance really is. How close the sport operates to the edge. And how little it sometimes takes to tip everything over. But this still isn't the most important part. Because what happened after the crash, what was confirmed later, is what transforms this from a racing story into something much heavier. Something the sport can't just move on from. And once you hear that, you'll understand why this penalty doesn't just matter. It lingers.